Spend all you want.
There was a game once when I was walking out of the forward spawn room door of New Queen Street and naturally I went back to the replay viewer to review this strange phenomenon. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has had such experiences dealing with this walking monstrosity of a hero design. I mean, we're talking about the one and only hero in the game that can accidentally one-shot kill any squishy target in the game on a primary fire that he can spam in your general direction, and he doesn't even need to reload. Right. Hanzo easily takes the cake for me as the worst hero design that Overwatch has ever conceived, bar none. When looking at his kit in its totality, it's almost like this hero trivializes the power of the one-shot kill, which we certainly can't speak on the topic of one-shots without making a direct comparison to Widowmaker. But at the very least, one of them is an archetype, whereas the other is an abomination. For one, Widowmaker has to actually put her crosshair on your head. With Hanzo? Thanks, Blizzard. And unlike the latter, Widowmaker actually fulfills the role of being the quintessential sniper to a T by exhibiting many of the strengths and weaknesses associated with such an archetype. So let's list down some of the key characteristics and interactions with Widowmaker to demonstrate this point. Unlike most Overwatch heroes, if we take a look at Widowmaker's kit as a whole, there really aren't any abilities in her kit outside of her Scope Fire that would stand out as powerful or meta-defining on their own. Venom Mine is a useful tool for flank detection, but its overall potency is limited to the context of enabling Widowmaker to gain visual intel against a poisoned enemy, where much of the threat level would then be subsequently determined by the power of a Scoped Fire follow-up. Compare this to the significance of other build abilities in the kits of heroes such as Symmetra or Torbjorn, and Venom Mine clearly functions as a nice-to-have but non-essential utility that pales in comparison to the power of the aforementioned build abilities. Her grappling hook is once again in a similar situation, where as much as it enables Widowmaker to occupy advantageous positions and perform the occasional hookshot, it would not rank high on a roster-wide mobility ability tier list, for the high cooldown and cast duration are great limiting factors that would stifle her capacity to rapidly and reactively disengage from close-quarter combat. And this is important because true to the nature of her archetype, the tunnel visioning and massive movement debuff aspects of Widowmaker's Scope Fire mode become a major detriment for herself in such close-quarter engagements, while her underwhelming automatic fire mode serves practically no deterrence against any and all threats. Widowmaker is certain to lose in any of such engagements, and would thus always prefer the specific positioning of an elevated backline where she can reliably secure value through her Scoped Fire. And when that very apparent win condition is broken, one's set high ground backline positioning either or is challenged or compromised. This hero is very much unlikely to secure any real value for the team in the same way a more general purpose hero such as Soldier 76 would in a variety of positions. On top of which, her overall damage per second without hit shots is actually flat out pathetic. And so tank heroes and their barriers become a natural go-to counter against her sidelines, even if diving or flanking her position is out of the picture. Oh, and she also has less health. All of these weaknesses combined just to counterbalance the fact that Widowmaker can one-shot and kill any non-tank hero other than Bastion on a primary fire. And even so, Widowmaker is still one of the most oppressive heroes in the game, and can dominate an entire lobby and define the flow of any given match and how it is played for all its players. Clearly, the power of the one-shot kill is not to be taken lightly, and in Widowmaker's case, she trades just about every conceivable power outside of her one-shot capacity to retaining this mechanic as the sole focal point of her kit. However, this does shape the foundations for which opens up avenues of counterplay against Widowmaker that would otherwise not be applicable against the standard fair damage hero. While we have briefly discussed the checks and balances associated with Widowmaker's overall kit design in retrospect to her one-shot capacity, Hanzo's design by contrast takes all of those checks and balances and... What checks and balances? But hold on a second. Hanzo isn't a top-tier damage hero. He even received a mini buff last season because he was underperforming. So what's all of this about a lack of balance going on over here? Okay, perhaps balance isn't the right word to use here, but let's do a comparison between Hanzo and Widowmaker and their various characteristics and interactions to demonstrate some of the severely undesirable, and dare I say, unfair aspects of engagement against Hanzo. The key characteristic that separates Hanzo's one-shot capacity from Widowmaker's is the projectile nature of his primary fire, which naturally means that his ability to one-shot kill is nowhere near as consistent as the latter hero. While this does sound like it would make his one-shot capacity less problematic compared to Widowmaker, I would actually argue that it creates the opposite effect by inducing an even more severe feeling of frustration against a hero where the likely outcome of the engagement is much too often left to the roll of a dice. Say, on Circuit Royal, you run the attack and trying to engage an enemy Widowmaker, who is seated on top of this perch where she has line of sight to the immediate zone around the payload. There is a clear understanding that she has the consistent capacity to take you out in one shot while you are in this zone. Therefore, you will want to circumvent her win conditions entirely by engaging her outside of said winning conditions altogether. That of being close quarter combat, preferably by getting the jump on her, or that you shut her value down through the use of barriers or displacements. You get the gist. Because of how apparent and consistent her unique weaknesses are, there is a semblance of a transparent win condition even when up against the most cracked out Widowmaker players. This is not the case with Hanzo, who unlike the former hero possesses a much less rigid template when it comes to his positioning, his no-go zones of engagement, nor even a clear weakness to exploit. This results in some really unfair feeling engagements, because we're talking about a hero with the ability to kill in one shot on a spammable primary fire. Despite having the technical lethality of a sniper, he almost excels in close-ranged combat as it reduces the inconsistency associated with his one-shot capacity. This is not the case of a conventional sniper whereby it is a lot easier to get a jump on the hero because of their tunnel vision status, because Hanzo isn't subject to any scope view limitations, nor even any massive movement debuff while charging his shots. Heck, he even gets to use his 2 mobility abilities while charging his primary fire, one of which doesn't even have a cooldown. Go onto the Sombra main subreddit and search for her biggest counters, and you'll see Hanzo topping the list, despite Sombra being literally built to get the jump on her enemies up close. Is it just me, or does the archer trumping the invisible assassin in close quarter combat make absolutely no sense? But perhaps the issue is we are working on the wrong assumptions here and miscategorizing Hanzo under the sniper umbrella. His positioning and mid to close quarter combat proficiency certainly imply otherwise. However, we do understand that the one-shot capacity, for which Widowmaker is the embodiment of, results in a series of trade-offs that are ultimately reflected in her kit, but not Hanzo's. So, what gives? Inconsistency is the name of the game when justifying the combination of Hanzo's one-shot kill potential with his otherwise generalist kit design. And I'm not keen to disagree with these justifications on the grounds of hero balance alone. However, there are many ways that a hero can be technically balanced while still resulting in outcomes of engagements that can lead towards convincingly unsatisfactory conclusions. Hanzo's kit design is the epitome of this former statement. I think that Soldier 76's design demonstrates everything done right in a way that Hanzo's design by contrast does so for the opposite sentiment. Think of how far as a metric for do you deserve this elimination, and the reason why it rarely feels anywhere close to as aggravating to be eliminated by a hero like Soldier 76 compared to Hanzo is because the nature of Soldier 76's primary fire props him up to answer this question not once, not twice, but through a numerous stream of rapid-fire tests, the aggregate result of which determines whether or not he ultimately deserves this elimination. Now, I'm not an academic or a scientist, and maybe one of you can school all of us on this, but in a sense, we could argue that eliminations secured by Soldier 76 instill a greater sense of confidence in the validity of said elimination results, due to the method of replicability being applicable in measuring whether or not he deserves this elimination. I found a quote that resonates with this sentiment, so here goes. We do not even take our own observations quite seriously, or accept them as scientific observations, until we have repeated and tested them. Only by such repetitions can we convince ourselves that we are not dealing with a mere isolated coincidence, but with events which, on account of their regularity and reproducibility, are in principle intersubjectively testable. Okay, maybe that was boring, but the statement about coincidence resonates so much with the experience of getting one shot killed by a Hanzo, and then wondering, was that skill, or was that luck? And it is also not a coincidence that this question is more often than not associated with a hero like Hanzo as compared to Soldier 76, because eliminations secured by Hanzo do not pass the test of replication by any degree to instill the same confidence on whether or not an elimination is deserved, in the same way that an elimination from Soldier 76 would. For demonstration purposes, let's assume that all players are landing hit shots only. There really are only two conclusions that can result from a successful Hanzo elimination via this measure. If Hanzo lands a single hit shot with minimal attempts in this instance, the elimination immediately fails the replication test, because there just simply isn't enough repetition of a consistent result to instill any confidence in the sentiment of a deserved elimination. Whereas if Hanzo had missed all his shots right till the 6th attempt, this actually reinforces that the elimination is of an undeserved nature, as the question asked results in the answer no, much more frequently than yes. There really is just no satisfactory conclusion whatsoever. Soldier 76, on the other hand, would have absolutely no problems in passing this test with flying colors. Wait a minute. Why are we letting Widowmaker off the hook again? She is just as guilty, if not more so than Hanzo in this department, and she most definitely fails in this very same test, so why the selective treatment here? As previously mentioned, Widowmaker's kit falls in line with a streamlined sniper archetype that forms the foundation for a series of strengths and weaknesses that ultimately opens the doors to an additional set of counterplay options uniquely applicable against herself. Ideally, you're not expected to participate in the test of, do you deserve this elimination, in the same way demonstrated thus far when up against an enemy Widowmaker. It would be insane for Soldier 76 to defeat a Widowmaker in an engagement 70 meters apart, and there is no reasonable expectation for him to do so. From the way I see it, her presence signals an immediately altered and unfair playground, and thus there is an onus to recognize this shift in the playing field, and to respond accordingly. The metric to the question of, do you deserve this elimination, cannot be translated one for one in this instance, as both parties would be looking to undeservingly exploit each other in their respective vulnerabilities, for which Widowmaker's sniper archetype is inbuilt with inherently. If there is a metric of performance that still applies, the prior metric is certainly no longer relevant, as it does not accurately account for the full scope of counterplay options that are uniquely on the table against Widowmaker. Unfortunately, there aren't any grounds to stand on when it comes to excusing Hanzo from this metric question, as inconsistency does not make Hanzo eligible for any of the sniper archetype weaknesses that would subject him to any of the additional avenues of counterplay. For instance, a Tracer isn't going to just roll over a Hanzo in close range combat, in the same way it would go for a Widowmaker. The same skills and strategies employed against the standard fair damage hero are mostly analogous to those employed against himself. But yet, regardless of whether it is a 70 meters, 40 meters, or even a 10 meters engagement, there is just no telling when Hanzo rolls a dice and puts some dirt in your eye, and you're just supposed to take the L and accept it. This whole aspect surrounding the lack of signals to disengage or any in-combat performance feedback really shines through, even regarding his visual and audio cues. This might seem like a nitpick, but the visual and audio environment of an Overwatch team fight is a complicated affair. But unlike the sharpness of Widowmaker's missed bullet trails and its striking audio cues that would screech to get yourself out of sight immediately even through all of the chaos, it would be comparatively effortless for Hanzo's tame visual and audio cues to just simply slip through the cracks completely unnoticed, despite few abilities ever matching the instant lethality of Hanzo's one-shot kill potential. It just seems like there has been absolutely nothing gotten right about the gameplay experience of fighting against Hanzo. But maybe credit should be given where credit is due, because aesthetically, Hanzo is a pretty cool looking character, right? I mean, he's the only Overwatch hero that can possibly fulfill the hero fantasy of being the Archer, and maybe that's all he needs to be. But if you have any deeper investments into fulfilling a layered hero fantasy, which would involve the personality and motivations of Hanzo as a character, I think this may speak for some when I say that his personality espouses a sense of deliberation and self-reflection, as well as a desire to become worthy for redemption.
There is beauty in simplicity. My aim is true. Simple geometry. The outcome was never in doubt. pool party?
But what has spamming a bunch of random one-shot killer arrows in the general direction of his enemies have anything to do with a sense of deliberation, self-reflection, or any semblance of worthiness? There is nothing about this gameplay loop that is worthy of redemption. I'm sure many of you might have encountered this video right here, and I highly recommend that you watch it if you haven't done so already. But I am not making this stuff up when the top comment here quite literally conveys Hanzo's gameplay loop to feel more akin to being a one-shotting Junkrat than being the actual projectile counterpart to the quintessential sniper in the game. As a reminder, Junkrat is the polar opposite of everything that Hanzo stands for and represents from a personality and motivation standpoint. He is obviously not supposed to be Junkrat with a bow. This is how you know you failed at conveying a hero fantasy through kit design, when his gameplay loop is more befittingly descriptive of a hero that is the complete contrary of what he is supposed to be. It's almost like destroying the hero fantasy of Hanzo had become a mission objective when the old scatter arrow ability was removed from Hanzo's kit in favor of storm arrows. Now I would be the last person to defend Hanzo being able to one-shot kill almost any hero in the game, yet alone by vaguely looking below their feet. But with the most recent Valentine's event, it is a testament to how iconic the ability is, when said ability is able to carry an entire event game mode by simply being the main flavor of the mode, even if just for the absurdity. I was scouring through the old patch notes back to pre-2018, and I'm actually shocked by the utter absence of any efforts or attempts whatsoever to tweak the scatter arrow ability prior to its removal. Like, zero. If there's one thing about Scatter Arrow that trumps the design of the current Storm Arrow's ability, it would be that it actually falls more closely in line with the fantasy of Hanzo as an actor of deliberation. We could argue that he should have never been able to shove 6 arrows up your junk in a split second, but at the very least, that exact scenario was only ever going to happen with the intent of it doing so. Instead, now we have Storm Arrows, which is essentially just doubling down on the Spamzo phenomenon and reinforcing that he really is Junkrat by heart. Pardon me, but why does this so-called sniper hero need a rapid-fire tank-busting, ricocheting fan the hammer ability with no spread that he spams in your general direction doing over 300 damage in 1.5 seconds again? Just verbalizing this makes me feel like I'm talking about an out-of-season's April Fool's patch note that runs 365 days a year. What is Hanzo supposed to be? What are his winning and losing conditions? How are you supposed to approach a one-shotting, tank-busting, mobile generalist sniper hero where you just have to pray to the gods that he doesn't do a 180 and send you back to spawn? Again, I'm not implying that Hanzo is a top-tier damage hero by any means, but having inconsistency, the balancing straw that keeps him in check, does not excuse him from being the most infuriating damage hero to be eliminated by, whereby solely relying on this trait of inconsistency rarely ever lends itself to providing prompt feedback on the type of engagements, yet alone lessons to be learned from said engagements. In an attempt to re-envision what a reworked Hanzo would look like, the key concerns to address here are to make his one-shot kill capacity more telegraphed and conditional, while being less inconsistent and keeping the mechanic intact. And I think this is important because the one-shot kill is a big part of Hanzo's hero fantasy, and we're not looking to delete that. Since Hanzo is currently the only hero in the game that does not benefit from his role passive, it wouldn't hurt to provide him with a second hero passive, one that I think would fit him thematically, and perhaps we can give it a bit of an edgy name here. It's a passive whereby all enemies damaged by Hanzo's arrows become marked, and subsequent arrow damage dealt by Hanzo against marked targets would be doubled.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Hey, chill out!
In conjunction with this new passive, his base arrow damage will be toned down from 125 to 75. This pushes his initial damage output to fall in line with the rest of the damage hero roster. It might seem like we're going in circles to make Hanzo do the damage he's going to do anyways, but the biggest change that this will introduce to the dynamic of playing as and against Hanzo is that Hanzo will no longer be landing random one-shot kills on enemies by default. If Hanzo is spamming his arrows down a choke, and a target is caught on one of his arrows, he or she is immediately signaled to as being marked by the enemy Hanzo, and thus has the opportunity to react by wearing out the mark status effect, either by staying out of Hanzo's line of sight, or through a cleansing ability. However, if the marked target does push through and engage Hanzo while the status effect is still active, the player would thus be fully aware of the conditional threat of Hanzo's one-shot kill capacity being applicable, even if he or she is fully healed up in this instance, and would therefore bear more responsibility for the consequence of getting killed in one shot. This change would also tackle the "do you deserve this elimination" dilemma for Hanzo, because he would need to land a minimum of 2 shots to eliminate a target by default, which means a minimum of 2 positive answers to the metric question rather than 1, helping just a further bit to reinforce confidence in the validity of the outcome of the engagement. Get rid of the whole "do more damage to hacked targets" thing. It's such a contrived mechanic that just makes hack a worse Zenyatta Discord org. The reason why I think such an applied debuff is much more sensible on a hero like Hanzo compared to Sombra is precisely because of the one-shot kill capacity that will be enabled by this debuff in Hanzo's case. This is a major change in the damage threshold, of which completely alters the perception of danger associated with engagements with and without the debuff applied respectively, and players would potentially make different decisions about how to engage Hanzo as a result of this debuff. Conversely, there are no major changes in the immediate thresholds when it comes to the current life hack being applied on targets. Sombra's damage goes from bad to not so bad. Mercy holes are beamed down on the hacked target, and the target stays alive regardless. There are no changes in the dynamic of how engagements are approached with or without the extra damage on hacked targets granted. So in my opinion, such a debuff mechanic is much more in tune with the kit of a reworked Hanzo than it is with the current life Sombra. We still have yet to tackle the inconsistent nature of Hanzo, which is problematic because if the recommended new passive and nerf to the base arrow damage is patched in as it is, I wager that this would arguably be a severe net nerf to Hanzo because his current balance statistically accounts for the fact that he is subject to landing the occasional random one-shot kill, which shouldn't be a thing at all, but I digress. We'll try to kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. Storm arrows as of the current live game does not belong on a hero whose fantasy toes the lines of precision and deliberation. Instead of keeping him as Junkrat's alter ego, I would de-emphasize, or in this case, delete Hanzo's spam capacity altogether. We'll drop the damage of a storm arrow down to 45, remove the ricochet of the ability, and reduce the amount of arrows down to 1. So, no more LOS diffing, no more spamming, no more tank busting. However, we will crank up the projectile speed of Storm Arrow by 1000%. It's basically a hit scan arrow. This allows Hanzo to access 45 damage on a cooldown that doesn't subject him to the inconsistency typically associated with his regular fire mode. While 45 damage alone isn't a very impressive number, when paired with the new passive, this new Storm Arrow becomes a utility that allows Hanzo to apply his debuff consistently. Furthermore, Storm Arrow would also meet the damage threshold for Hanzo to quickly eliminate any 200 HP target using a 2-shot combination with his primary fire, so long as a minimum of 1 hit shot is secured. Nonetheless, it doesn't change the fact that for Hanzo and his enemies, Hanzo is still reliant on an inconsistent primary fire to pull off a full elimination. I actually think that there's room for both Storm Arrow and Scatter Arrow to exist on Hanzo's kit simultaneously. But the usage of Scatter Arrow as a feat destroyer has always felt like the most broken and uninteresting component of the ability. I mean, this ability was clearly marketed with the trajectory of ricocheting arrows as its selling point, and visual effects were applied on this ability to emphasize this characteristic. If Scatter Arrow was to make a return, I think that shifting the power of Scatter Arrow towards something that highlights the trajectory of its arrows and creating a utility out of said trajectory is the way forward. Unfortunately, we have already done half the footwork with the new passive discussed earlier. All we need to do now is to apply the debuff of the new passive to the trajectory of Scatter Arrow. To counteract the use of Scatter Arrow as a one-shot kill ability, each of the 6 arrows now deal only a base of 10 damage on impact. Instead, the focus of the ability would now be to create lingering trajectory lines that does damage over time. Think of it as Hanzo being able to create his own version of a laser room for his enemies. The raw damage is not necessarily the strength of the ability, however, as more importantly, targets that receive damage from either the arrows or the trajectory lines become marked by Hanzo's new passive. The idea is to reduce the inconsistency associated with his primary fire by allowing him to create an environment that facilitates lining up his shots better. If Hanzo's enemies are given an incentive to avoid the trajectory lines created by this new Scatter Arrow, it reduces the amount of space that enemies can maneuver throughout the uptime of Scatter Arrow's trajectory lines, and thus lowering the chance for a missed primary fire follow-up. Perhaps all of this is starting to sound overpowering, but keep in mind that these are abilities to take the place of the random one-shot kill potential in his current life kit, and that this new iteration of Hanzo is severely reliant on damaging targets that are marked by his new passive. Conversely, this creates new unfavorable matchups for Hanzo that I would argue are actually desperately needed for a hero who has practically no hero counters alive. Heroes like Reaper and Moira that are dueling an enemy Hanzo would stand to gain heavily from these changes, as they can cleanse themselves mid-combat to counteract the marked debuff. Winston will no longer have his barrier shredded by the Archer, and heroes on the preemptive flank will no longer find themselves getting unburped by a Hanzo from the 180. Unless you're Tracer, but even then, numbers can be adjusted to account for that too, and Hanzo's gameplay loop would finally make sense in conjunction with his hero fantasy as an actor of the liberation that marks his targets and aims for the kill. And maybe, just maybe, I won't have to go through another episode when I'm walking the streets of New Queens ever again.